Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear participants. We are starting this session once again because of some disruption in our connection. So, as far as this surah is concerned, Surah Nisa, the fourth surah of the Quran, it forms a pair with the next surah, which is Surah Maida. And directives of the Sharia have been given in this surah relating to women, inheritance laws, and in some of the other affairs. And in the next surah, a covenant is taken by the Almighty that this Sharia is like a misak, it's like a promise between its followers and God Himself. And that is why the next surah begins with the words, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu, awfu bil uqud, O believers, fulfill your promise or promises with God. In Surah Nisa, we have reached almost the middle of the surah, and we will see that in this middle part of the surah, the hypocrites have been specially discussed, and they had ties with their own brethren, especially amongst the Ishmaelites and of course the Jews as well, and they were not willing to migrate to Muslim lands in spite of having given this opportunity. The Quran says if they don't migrate, and then they will be treated with them, and they shall be killed, and war is waged between them, then they will not be spared. So verse 104, from which we will now begin, it reads like, وَلَا تَهِنُوا فِي ابْتِغَاءِ الْقَوْمِ إِن تَكُونُوا تَأْلَمُونَ فَإِنَّهُمْ يَأْلَمُونَ كَمَا تَأْلَمُونَ وَتَرْجُونَ مِنَ اللَّهِ مَا لَا يَرْجُونَ وَكَانَ اللَّهُ عَلِيمًا حَكِيمًا. Believers, set out for this war and do not show feebleness in pursuing the enemy. If you are suffering, they too are suffering like you. However, you expect from God what they do not, and always remember that God is all-knowing, all-wise. One thing that has to be noted as far as the stylistics of the Quran is concerned, the word al-qawm, the way it occurs here and it occurs at many other places, although it occurs in a rather vague way, does not precisely point out who is being referred to, but whenever it is mentioned in this way, it actually refers to the enemy. And this can be seen in the Quran, and not only in the Quran but also in classical Arabic literature. So when it says وَلَا تَهِنُوا فِي ابْتِغَاءِ الْقَوْمِ, it means that do not show feebleness in pursuing the qawm, the nation. And of course, because the word al-qawm is referring to the enemy, so what is being implied here is that do not show any slackness or weakness in pursuing the enemy nation. And then what the important thing which is discussed here is that Muslims must rest assured that the hardships that they are inflicted with are for their own well-being and are a requisite of the knowledge and wisdom of God. So if they are suffering something, they should know that it is, they know that if they suffer and they bear this suffering with magnanimity and with a large heart, then they are going to be rewarded. So precisely that is what is meant by the words that you expect, what they do not expect. So of course they do not expect any reward from God because they don't have that belief in the hereafter. But Muslims should see that as far as the suffering is concerned, both they themselves and the enemy are suffering. But the difference is that the enemy does not hope anything from God because it does not believe any in the hereafter or the reward in the hereafter. Whereas Muslims, they believe that even if they suffer in this world, then they will be rewarded and they will be compensated for that. So that is precisely what is said here. فَإِنَّهُمْ يَعْلَمُونَ كَمَا تَعْلَمُونَ, which means that they are suffering because it's a war. In war, it's not just the one side which suffers, it is both sides which suffer. But the thing is that Muslims, because they know the promise of God, that if they bear this suffering with patience and perseverance, then they will be rewarded. So, وَتَرْجُونَ, that you expect from God what they do not expect. And God is all-knowing and all-wise. إِنَّا أَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الْكِتَابَ بِالْحَقِّ لِتَحْكُمَ بَيْنَ النَّاسِ بِمَا أَرَاكَ اللَّهُ وَلَا تَكُنْ لِلْخَائِنِينَ خَصِيمًا وَاسْتَغْفِرِ اللَّهَ إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ غَفُورًا رَحِيمًا وَلَا تُجَادِلْ عَنِ الَّذِينَ يَخْتَانُونَ أَنفُسَهُمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ مَنْ كَانَ خَوَّانًا أَثِيمًا. We have revealed to you this book with the truth, so that by that which God has shown you, you may decide between people as to who is sincere and who is a hypocrite among them. And come what may, do not advocate these who break promises. So if you look at this word, تَحْكُمَ بَيْنَ النَّاسِ بِمَا أَرَاكَ اللَّهُ, which means that God has shown you what the truth is. So it actually means that God has shown the Prophet from the mind's eye what the truth is, and it is absolutely something which is evident to the Prophet. Also, one thing that might become evident is that it seemingly comes out as a very harsh address to the Prophet, because it says that do not la takun lil kha'inina khasima, that do not advocate those people who break promises. So one would never have expected the Prophet to do so. So why is it that the Prophet is addressed in such a way? Now, we have discussed this style of the Quran at other instances, in other sessions and courses in which we were discussing the stylistics of the Quran, that at times the Prophet is addressed not because he is addressed per se, but because he is addressed and indirectly that address is directed towards some other entity. And the only reason not to make it a direct address is so that the other person or the other group of people is given a chance to reflect, because if they would have been addressed directly, then it would have been a very severe thing, and this would have also caused them to defend themselves, or their ego might have gotten in their way. So at times the Almighty does not address the Quraysh or the enemies of the Prophet, but the address is the Prophet himself, but it is directed towards the hypocrites, or of course to other entities. In this case, the hypocrites are being addressed. So we have revealed to you this book with the truth, so that by that which God has shown you, you may decide between people as to who is sincere and who is a hypocrite among them. And come what may, do not advocate these who break promises. So we have clearly this important thing that has been mentioned here, that the Prophet has been asked to actually seek forgiveness for them. Wastaghfirillah, and keep asking for God's pardon for these people. Inna Allaha kana ghafurur rahima, and God is forgiving and ever merciful. وَلَا تُجَادِلْ عَنِ الَّذِينَ يَخْتَانُونَ أَنفُسَهُمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ مَنْ كَانَ خَوَّانًا أَثِيمًا. This style is continuing here also. It does seem that as if the Prophet is being addressed, but yes, apparently by words he is being addressed, but the direction of address is something which is diverted towards the disbelievers. And the words are that do not advocate those who betray their own selves. God is not like a person who breaks promises and usurps rights. So it has a very special ring that we have to understand, that at times this indirect address gives the party or the group that is meant to be addressed the time and the opportunity to think and take a decision. And then the Quran says, يَسْتَخْفُونَ مِنَ النَّاسِ وَلَا يَسْتَخْفُونَ مِنَ اللَّهِ وَهُوَ مَعَهُمْ إِذْ يُبَيِّتُونَ مَا لَا يَرْضَى مِنَ الْقَوْلِ وَكَانَ اللَّهُ بِمَا يَعْمَلُونَ مُحِيطًا. They can hide from people, but they cannot hide from God. They can hide from people, but they cannot hide from God. He is with them even when they indulge in whispering that is against His will. And God encompasses everything they do. So we have to understand that as far as the Quran is concerned, and it is absolutely clear that these hypocrites that have been discussed here, they are the ones who are being addressed. They find excuses to, I mean, not only these hypocrites, but the people who are connected to these hypocrites. And it also means that people who are supporting these hypocrites, I mean, they were trying to back these hypocrites because of their personal relationship with them, they are being taken to task, and they are being told that if they try to find excuses to exonerate these hypocrites from their blatant sins, then remember, this is something that they have to really bear with. And we also can see that this discourse goes right up to verse 115, where we will be ending this passage, that all the discourse answers them basically. It tries to make a point that you who are supporting these hypocrites, that you should know that the time is up, and this is not the time to actually advocate them. And we also know that when the news of secret gatherings and conspiracies of the hypocrites would reach the Prophet and his companions, they would be taken to task in some form or the other. At times, the supporters of the hypocrites mentioned earlier would try to defend them by saying that they were very sincere people and were well-wishers of the Muslims. The conversations and discussions in their gatherings were to the benefit and well-being of Islam and the Muslims. And if in this regard they were asked about something that they were not able to justify, they would ascribe it to some decent person who could not even imagined such a thing. So it was to counter this advocacy of these people that the Quran has very subtly exposed these connivances and done so in such a beautiful way that everything has come to the fore. Something that has become very prominent, and the adversaries are not in a position in any way to deny it. So it says that you can hide from God, but you cannot hide. You can hide from people, but you cannot hide from God. يَسْتَخْفُونَ مِنَ النَّاسِ وَلَا يَسْتَخْفُونَ مِنَ اللَّهِ وَهُوَ مَعَهُمْ. And God is with them when they indulge in whispering that is against His will. مَا لَا يَرْضَى مِنَ الْقَوْلِ. So don't think that God is not watching over you. He clearly knows all of you, what your agenda is, and what exactly you are up to. And وَكَانَ اللَّهُ بِمَا يَعْمَلُونَ مُحِيطًا is actually a warning that is sounded to them that God encompasses everything, which means that His knowledge, His awareness of all these things is so complete and so comprehensive that don't think that you can escape His notice. ها أنتم هؤلاء جادلتم عنهم في الحياة الدنيا فمن يجادل الله عنهم يوم القيامة أم من يكون عليهم وكيلا. It is you all who argued in favor of these wrongdoers in the life of this world, but who will argue in favor of them with God on the day of judgment, or who will be responsible for them? Indeed, he who commits a vice or is unjust to his own soul, then seeks God's pardon, will find God to be forgiving and ever merciful. So, وَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ سُوءًا أَوْ يَظْلِمْ نَفْسَهُ ثُمَّ يَسْتَغْفِرِ اللَّهَ يَجِدِ اللَّهَ غَفُورًا رَحِيمًا. And again, we have to understand that there is no way to escape God's punishment. This is something that cannot be done in any way. And so these hypocrites are being, the case is being made against them, and Muslims or weak Muslims who are supporting these hypocrites, they are being told that today you are trying to be their advocates in this world. جَادَلْتُمْ عَنْهُمْ فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا, that you are basically arguing in favor of them in this world. But what will happen when on the day of judgment they will be totally exposed? Would you then also be in a position to advocate them? So these Muslims are warned once again that hypocrisy is something which God will not tolerate. So if they are going to support these hypocrites, they might try to do it in this world, but this is not going to remain hidden because God is watching over them, and nevertheless in the hereafter this is something that is going to take its toll. And وَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ سُوءًا يَظْلِمْ نَفْسَهُ ثُمَّ يَسْتَغْفِرِ اللَّهَ يَجِدِ اللَّهَ غَفُورًا رَحِيمًا. Indeed, he who commits a vice or is unjust to his own soul, then seeks God's pardon, he will find God to be forgiving and ever merciful. So normally, Yazlim Nafsahu is a connotation for polytheism or associating partners with God. So what is being said here, that people who do bad deeds or who commit sin and also go as far as to associate partners with God, but then summa yastaghfirillaha, if they seek God's pardon, then God is not, He's not bent upon to punish them in any way. He's there for them. He is going to forgive them. They will find Yadidillaha Ghafura Rahima. They will find that He is absolutely merciful to all these people. وَمَنْ يَكْسِبْ إِسْمًا فَإِنَّمَا يَكْسِبُهُ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ وَكَانَ اللَّهُ عَلِيمًا حَكِيمًا. By ascribing their sins to others, they try to save themselves. Tell them, he who commits an offense earns its punishment for his own self. This is the law of God, and God is all-knowing, and God is all-knowing wise. So once again, we know that as far as these people are concerned, another mischief of the hypocrites is exposed in this verse. So when these people were called to account for some mistake or act of injustice, instead of confessing to it, instead of being apologetic, they would blame some innocent person for the offense. So the verse says that this attitude of absolving oneself from God is also wrong. Through this calumny or this slander, which is a lie of course, they can deceive the world, but they cannot deceive God. In His eyes, these people will not bear the burden of their own sin, but also the additional burden of the sin of slander and falsehood. So, وَمَنْ يَكْسِبْ إِسْمًا فَإِنَّمَا يَكْسِبُهُ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ. He who commits an offense earns his punishment for his own self. This is the law of God, and God is all-knowing and wise. And then it is said, وَمَنْ يَكْسِبْ إِسْمًا وَمَنْ يَكْسِبْ إِسْمًا وَمَنْ يَكْسِبْ خَطِيَّةً أَوْ إِسْمًا ثُمَّ يَرْمِي بِهِ بَرِيًّا فَقَدِ احْتَمَلَ بُهْتَانًا وَإِسْمًا عَظِيمًا. He who commits an offense or a sin, then blames an innocent person for it, bears the burden of a great calumny and a blatant sin. So this is what I was just referring to, that if they start blaming other people for a sin that they committed themselves, then they are now only adding to their own misery and to their own punishment, because they are blaming people who are absolutely innocent. وَلَوْلَا فَضْلُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكَ وَرَحْمَتُهُ لَحَمَّتْ طَائِفَةٌ مِّنْهُمْ أَن يُضِلُّوكَ وَمَا يُضِلُّونَ إِلَّا أَنفُسَهُمْ وَمَا يَضُرُّونَكَ مِنْ شَيْءٍ وَأَنزَلَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْكَ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةَ وَعَلَّمَكَ مَا لَمْ تَكُنْ تَعْلَمُ وَكَانَ فَضْلُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكَ عَظِيمًا. But for God's grace and mercy on you, O Prophet, a group from among them had decided that it would lead you astray, come what may, even though they are leading astray none but themselves, nor are they harming you. How can they lead you astray? God has revealed to you His law and His wisdom, and in this manner taught you what you did not know, and great is God's blessing on you. Which actually means that the companions of the Prophet, they had adopted a path that was, of course, an acceptable path. They were allowed to make this assessment. And God says that had not the blessing and grace and mercy of God been on the Prophet, then one group among the disbelievers were hell-bent to lead them astray. So that is what God is trying to assure the Prophet, that in spite of the enemy attack or the enemy onslaught in leading them astray, it was God who stopped this enemy onslaught. He became a shield for the believers against these disbelievers. And to them it is said, وَمَا يُضِلُّونَ إِلَّا أَنفُسَهُمْ وَمَا يَضُرُّونَكَ مِنْ شَيْءٍ, which means that come what may, even though they are leading astray none but themselves. وَمَا يُضِلُّونَ إِلَّا أَنفُسَهُمْ. If they are trying to lead astray, or they would like the Prophet to go astray, but when they do this, they are going to just lead astray themselves, because in reality they are deceiving themselves. And وَمَا يَضُرُّونَكَ مِنْ شَيْءٍ, and they will not be harming you in any way. They will be only harming themselves. And then it is mentioned that how this fadl of God, this blessing of God is going to be there to welcome them and to protect them. And as it's given these very in these trying circumstances, the way the Muslims are being treated, they are being told that as a remedy and as a compensation, as an antidote, God has revealed His book, which of course refers to the law here, and His hikmah, which is the wisdom. And in this way He has taught them what He did not know. Obviously, the addressee is the Prophet himself, that God says that I revealed my law to you and I have revealed my wisdom to you, and in this way I have taught what you did not know. We have already discussed this verse of the Quran that has occurred at many instances, that when this verse occurs in this context, then the word Al-Kitab refers to the law or the Sharia, and Al-Hikmah refers to wisdom. And this wisdom comprises of faith and morality. So in other words, what is being said here is that the content of religion is based on the Sharia and the Hikmah. The Sharia, of course, refers to the directives of the Sharia, and Hikmah refers to the articles of faith and to morality. So when it is said that in this way God taught the Prophet that which he did not know, obviously refers to the fact that this is the first time, for the first time after the departure of Prophet Ishmael, which is 2,500 years ago, that a Prophet has come amongst the Ishmaelites, and he is delivering them the content of religion in the form of Al-Kitab, which is Al-Sharia, and Al-Hikmah, which is of course morality and the articles of faith. And then it is said, وَكَانَ فَضْلُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكَ عَظِيمًا, and great is God's blessing on you. لا خير في كثير من نجواهم إلا من أمر بصدقة أو معروف أو إصلاح بين الناس ومن يفعل ذلك ابتغاء مرضات الله فسوف نؤتيه أجرا عظيما ومن يشاقق الرسول من بعد ما تبين له الهدى ويتبع غير سبيل المؤمنين نوليه ما تولى ونصليه جهنم وساءت مصيرا. There is no good in most of their whisperings. Yes, there is certainly good in the whispering of those who exhort to charity or guide towards virtue or urge reconciliation in the matters of people. And they who do this to please God, on them we shall soon confer a great reward. So again, something that is mentioned here in very clear words is that these hypocrites, they would try to whisper, and these whisperings of course would be composed of evil things, But the Quran says that there's nothing good about these things, except if those whisperings that are done are relate to something which is good, relate to charity or reforming people amongst themselves. And a person who does this, who whispers or suggests ways and means to bring people together, and does so in a charitable way, and also has this objective of bringing people together and reforming them. And the Quran says, فَسَوْفَ نُؤْتِيهِ أَجْرًا عَظِيمًا, that God says that very soon I will give him a great reward. But on the other hand, it is said that those who oppose the messenger, even after the path of guidance is fully evident to them, and leaving the path of those who have sincerely professed faith in you, follow some other path, we shall make them follow the path they themselves have gone to, and ultimately cast them into hell. It is a very evil abode. So clearly you can see that in the first instance it is said people who whisper, who make suggestions or give suggestions regarding righteousness and charity and reformation, it is something very welcome. But on the other hand, people who oppose the messenger, and who even after the path of guidance is fully evident to them. Now this is the crime and sin which the Almighty has said is unforgivable. And had there been any confusion, had there been any lack of information, had there been any other pretext, God would have been very kind to them. But the thing here is that they lead people astray even after knowing what the right path is. So the Quran says, مِن بَعْدِ مَا تَبَيَّنَ لَهُ الْهُدَى, leaving the path, even after the guidance or the path of guidance is fully evident to them. And it is said that leaving the path of those who have sincerely professed faith in you, follow some other path. In spite of knowing what the true path is, they follow some other path. Then God says that as a punishment, we shall let them wander in finding that path, that evil path, and treading on that path. And ultimately they will be cast into hell. وَنُسْلِهِ جَهَنَّمْ وَسَاءَتْ مَصِيرًا. And it might be of interest for you to note that this verse of Surah Nisa, this 15th verse, which actually is the source of one of the instruments of Islamic law, that is ijma, which means consensus of the Muslim scholars. They think that this is the verse that actually tells us that ijma or consensus of the Muslims is also something of an authority, and you have to reckon with it, you have to honor it. But we have clearly seen that the context of this verse does not accept this explanation. It is not the consensus of the Muslims that is being discussed here. What is being discussed here is that people who know the right path and they know the wrong path, but in spite of knowing the wrong path, they deliberately choose to tread on the wrong path. It is they who will be left to wander on that wrong path, and there is no absolutely any option or any possibility of ijma or consensus in any way being discussed here. It is something that is totally unrelated, and legend has it that it is Imam Shafi about whom it is said, although still to be fully verified, that once this instrument of ijma had been accepted as a source of law, and even in some cases as a source of religion, then Imam Shafi, after that, he read the Quran 100 times and he could not find a verse that would actually point that ijma or consensus is such an instrument. And then he said, well, this is the verse, after 100 times reading the Quran, that this verse of Surah Nisa, the 115th verse, is the makhaz or the source of ijma in the Quran. If this legend or story is correctly ascribed to him, then we can only say that the context does not accept this at all. The context is absolutely clear and evident that people who oppose the Prophet after knowing what the right path is and they tread the wrong path, and the Quran says that as a punishment for this, the Almighty will let them wander on that path and continue to tread on that path, and this would be something that is a form of a torment and a punishment, and a greater punishment awaits them in hell. Nuslihi Jahannam wasa'at masira, we shall consign them to hell, and it is a very evil abode. So this brings us to an end to today's discussion on the Quranic verses. We will next discuss the idiomatic and literal translation, but before we do that, if you have any questions regarding this passage, please raise them.
So, Dr. Saleem, we have a few questions now. Shabana Ansari, please unmute your mic and ask your question.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम।
वालेकुम अस्सलाम।
डॉक्टर साहब, यही वाला जो अभी आपने इजमा और कंसेंसस का बताया, तो ये इस 115 आयत से किस तरह, कौन सी चीज से उन्होंने इसको इजमा को निकाला, मुझे नहीं समझ आ रहा है, इसको थोड़ा सा फिर से बताइए.
I think that the words which say that yattabi ghaira sabil al-mu'mineen, so they think that there is a sabil al-mu'mineen, the path of the believers which they tread, and they surmise in their mind that the path of the Muslims is what the path of ijma is, what the path of consensus is. Obviously there is absolutely no, I mean, this cannot be derived, but as I said, this is something that we are struggling to even understand, that how can this be connected to ijma in any case. So what I have tried to make sense of is that perhaps the word Sabilul Mu'mineen, the way of the Muslims, made them think that the way of the Muslims was actually the way of ijma, or the way of being united in a particular decision. And obviously this is not what the Quran is telling us here.
और ये वही इजमा है जिसको अभी भी कहा जाता है कि इस चीज पर इजमाए उम्मत है, ये वही वाला इजमा है?
Correct, that is the same ijma. So ijma, basically you have to understand that in our juristic terminology and in our ilmul usul, it is used in two meanings. So one is on the content of religion, that there is a ijma or consensus on what the content of religion is, and that is an ijma that we do accept, and that of course is what gives religion its certitude. That ijma means that the content, the nas of the Quran, the Sunnah itself, these are the sources. So the nas themselves, they have this ijma, which means that everyone agrees that this is the content of religion. This is one type of ijma. Another type of ijma means that all scholars, they agree on a particular interpretation of a Quranic verse or a directive. So if there is an agreement of all the scholars on a particular understanding and interpretation of a Quranic verse, then they say that this is also an ijma, not on the text but on the understanding of the text. This is something which the Quran never accepts. There is no room for it to be an acceptable thing. I mean, the Quran has not given us any understanding of the text. The Prophet himself is not given that as well. All that we are given is the text itself. And understanding the text is a human endeavor. The Prophet did understood the text at times, and he conveyed that, and that is what we get through many ahadith. And of course, scholars of religion also do that, and they are continuing to do that. They interpret the text, they come up with an interpretation, and that interpretation is based on arguments and reasoning. It could be right, it could be wrong, and subsequent scholars, they either challenge it or they accept it, and in this way the torrent of human intellectual advancement goes on. But as far as the interpretation of a particular verse is concerned, there are a number of objections that have been raised, and if you would like to read more on this topic, then one of the most outstanding authorities who have written on this is Imam Shawkani. In his book Al-Irshad al-Fuhul, basically, I think it may have been translated into English or Urdu, he has shown that this verse has absolutely no bearing on ijma. There is another narrative also which is cited in favor of ijma, that too has been misunderstood, and all other arguments that are presented in favor of the ijma of interpretation are refuted by him, because what we have as an ijma is the text and the source, not the interpretation of the source.
बहुत शुक्रिया, बहुत अच्छी तरह समझ आया.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem, for that. Shabnam, please unmute your mic and ask your question.
थैंक यू बिस्मा. सर, ये आयत नंबर 113 में इस वक्त मेरे सामने तो उसका टेक्स्ट नहीं है, लेकिन वो मेरे ज़हन में वर्ड्स हैं. कुछ वर्ड्स आ रहे हैं, लहम्मत ताइफतन, कि एक अगरों ने इरादा किया था कि वो आपको तो सर ये अल्फाज से महसूस होता है कि किसी इंसिडेंट की तरफ इशारा है. इट्स नॉट जनरल. इज इट सो सर? कुछ ऐसा है, क्योंकि आगे भी फिर वो जो सरगोशियां करते हैं और ये वो का कुछ ऐसा कुछ इंसिडेंट है, कोर्ट हुआ या बस नहीं हमें?
I mean, there is not a particular incident. It's just a strategy that they had adopted. They said that, well, now that Islam or the forces of Islam are gaining force, now we don't have any backup, we don't have anything to fall back on. So the only way is to try to make them realize that they must turn back to disbelief, otherwise they will be persecuted, otherwise they will be taken to task. So it's like a threat and a warning from them that we will be more stern and harsh on you. It does not refer to any particular incident. It only refers to the fact that we will try our best to divert you back towards disbelief. And if you know that a lot of things that the hypocrites did were actually amounting to bring the prophetic household into disrepute. So they cast aspersions on the character of Aisha radiallahu anha. The incident of Ifk occurred in these times, in which she was actually blamed of adultery. We also know that the wives of the Prophet, they were also, they would be met in a way that these hypocrites would go to them, try to chit chat with them, and then bring back false reports as if they had made friends with these wives of the Prophet, and then they would say to other people that we have convinced them to marry us, or we have convinced them to do such thing with us. So they would spread this mischief. And if you read Surah Ahzab, which also deals with hypocrites in detail, you'll see how they had woven a web across the house of the Prophet and the whole society. And the purpose was to somehow make the ordinary people, the masses, make them realize that their messenger, who thinks that he is an envoy of God, a messenger of God, he is not an envoy of God. Otherwise, how could his household be in such a form of disarray that one of his wives is accused of adultery? So these were some of the measures that they had adopted. Amongst many measures, this was one of the measures to somehow bring the house of the Prophet into disrepute, somehow damage their reputation. And it's referring to them. But if they succeeded in that, then what would have happened? The common masses would have become disillusioned from the Prophet, and they might have left the creed of Islam.
Sir, it means कि वो indirectly मोमिनीन को address कर रहा है. Prophet को तो नहीं जाहिर है वो कुछ कर सकते थे, stray नहीं कर सकते थे.
Of course, the masses, not even the good Muslims, not even the strong Muslims, but the masses.
Right, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Jazakallah.
Amar Rasool, you're up next. Please ask your question.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Saab. Dr. Saab, my question is, it has not been properly thought through, but still I feel that it's something that is on my mind about this verse about ijma and this discussion that we just had. So to my mind, isn't it not true that it provides one of very powerful shields for Quranic misinterpretation by people like Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi or Osama bin Laden? Because if there was no protection of a scholarly ijma in Islam, then anyone could jump in and they could interpret or offer an interpretation of Quranic verses which suit their politics or agenda, and then there would be no pushback against it or no protection against it. But because mainstream thoughts in Islam or mainstream concepts in Islam are protected from such attacks because the ijma exists. And is it not possible that it is one of the ways in which God protects the purpose of the words of the Quran? So this is
okay. I do understand. I do get your point. But before I answer your question, let me also clarify one thing which was asked by Shabnam just before you, when she said that how can they have been successful in leading the Prophet astray. So one more point that Shabnam that you might need to consider here is that the Quranic verse is actually وَلَوْلَا فَضْلُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكَ وَرَحْمَتُهُ لَهَمَّتْ طَائِفَةٌ مِّنْهُمْ أَن يُضِلُّوكَ, that but for God's grace and mercy on you, which is of course addressing the Prophet, a group from among them had decided that it would lead you astray come what may, even though they were leading astray none but themselves. So basically, it's not that they would have become successful in leading the messenger of God astray, but they would have tried their best as well. So remember, it's not just the masses that they were after. For the masses, they had become quite successful in spreading those rumors. But in the case of the Prophet, they might have not become successful, but this verse is actually telling us and informing everyone that they were so hell-bent that they did not even spare the Prophet, and they wanted to lead him astray as well. They did not succeed, but the effort that they made was also related to his own self as well. So I just wanted to clarify this, because the verses clearly reflect that the words are "An yudilluk," O Prophet, they try to lead you astray. The second thing, Amar Rasool, that you have just asked your own question, and By the way, before I answer your own question, I do remember from last week another question that perhaps you maybe or someone else had raised regarding eternal punishment of hell for killing a non-Muslim. And on that occasion, I had remarked that we don't find any verse in the Quran that tells us that killing a non-Muslim will be punishable by eternal hell. But later on, when I reflected on the Quran, another verse came to my mind, and I think that verse actually is an answer to your question, and that is that even for a non-Muslim, the Quran has at another instance mentioned that it is eternal hell if you kill a person regardless of faith. So if you read Surah Furqan, the last paragraph of Surah Furqan, which says that وَالَّذِينَ إِذَا أَنفَقُوا لَمْ يُسْرِفُوا وَلَمْ يَقْتُرُوا وَكَانَ بَيْنَ ذَلِكَ قَوَامًا وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَدْعُونَ. So it actually mentions 3 sins. لَا يَدْعُونَ مَعَ اللَّهِ إِلَٰهًا آخَرَ, which is polytheism. وَلَا يَقْتُلُونَ النَّفْسَ الَّتِي حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ إِلَّا بِالْحَقِّ. And who do not kill every innocent Muslim or any, it's not the word Muslim that is mentioned here that I would like to point out. It's like the word life, nafs, which is mentioned here, regardless of faith. So every life taken without that person being guilty of killing someone or spreading disorder in the earth, which means taking an innocent life, regardless of faith, the Quran specifies yakhlud fihi muhana, that person will be consigned to hell, yakhlud fihi muhana, and he'll remain there until eternity. So it's exactly the same which is for a Muslim also. Because we were studying the Muslim part in Surah Al-Nisa in our previous session, so it just was confined there. Otherwise, in Surah Furqan, as I said, if you read the last paragraph, the 3 sins which are mentioned there, in fact, are polytheism, murder, and adultery. If committed, if a person becomes used to committing it, it becomes a habit. So shirk, which is polytheism, murder, and adultery. If this is done something, if it is done in a way that a person is not has not earned God's forgiveness and he's not ashamed of what he has done, then Quran says yakhlud fihi muhana, he'll stay in hell forever. So that is, I think, the right answer, that even for people who kill non-Muslims, if they are innocent, then whatever their punishment in this world, that's, of course, that would be a punishment, whatever the punishment is. But in the hereafter, the Quran is clearly telling us that they will be consigned to hell eternally. So I just wanted to make this comment also. Now, as far as your question regarding ijma is concerned, let me also first tell you, before answering your question, that ijma itself is something which is almost impossible. How can you have all these scholars of the world that have come right from the times of the Prophet until now? Because scholars, that is what is said, that it is basically the understanding of all scholars of Islam. So first and foremost, all that you can perhaps say is that that is not even possible, because no one has that lifespan in which all the Muslim scholars would be together and they would interpret a verse in the same way. Secondly, and more importantly, this instrument of ijma has been invented, as you have rightly said, as a protection against wrong interpretations. But you see, this again is something, if it was something that had to be maintained in any way, then God would have clearly spelled out that you have to follow, for example, just the opinion of the Sahaba. Let alone the ijma of the whole ummah. It could have been said that the ijma of the Sahaba, because they existed in one point of time. So the only ijma that is possible is for people who exist in the same period. And the Sahaba, of course, they were contemporaneous to each other. So the Prophet and the Sahaba's ijma, which would mean that they have the same opinion. The Quran did not say that. And practically also, we don't ever know that all the Sahaba had a particular opinion about some matter or not. So we don't know about many issues regarding the opinion of all the Sahaba. We might be knowing some of the Sahaba saying something and some of the Sahaba saying other thing. And on the other hand, we can also see that in many cases the Sahaba have been differing with each other. For example, a very small thing that you might need to know is that illa ma zahara minha, very famous verse of the Quran, which says that you should not guide your embellishments except that are visible. So we have a whole school of thought which follows Abdullah ibn Mas'ud's interpretation, which means that you have to hide every single part of your body. And then there is another interpretation by Abdullah ibn Abbas which says that no, this does not mean actually every part of the body, but it only refers to things which are apparent, that you just cannot hide. So you see, amongst the Sahaba also, had this directive been given, the next question would have been that even the Sahaba, they have this difference of opinion. So what it seems is that basically God has given the text only and left people to understand the text on their own basis, on their own understanding, and have that magnanimity that whatever you understand should be on the basis of reasoning, and another person can have a different reasoning. So for you to consider the other person's interpretation would be actually to weigh your own reasoning against his reasoning, his or hers reasoning. So that is what God wants us to use, our mind, to use our intellect. And if we come up with a different interpretation, then it should not be a cause of animosity or malice for the other person. It should be a cause of tolerance, that I have understood the verse in a particular way and my arguments are such and such, and someone else has done so in a different way and his or her arguments are such and such. So on the contrary, God wanted people to have a different approach if they had a different approach, and to make them realize that this is how things are meant to be, that you understand what you think you have understood, and your accountability would be on the basis of your understanding, not the understanding of the other person. And if you are convinced by the other person, then you should change your own view. So I think that this is how the Almighty has said in the Quran also, that my revelation addresses the mind. It addresses your intellect, and that is precisely what is meant, that when something is addressed to the intellect, it means that it is always based on reasoning and argument, so that your intellect can understand, or maybe even negate that if you don't think that the arguments they hold any water. So basically, it is the intellect of a person that the Almighty wants to be used, and if he or she comes to a different interpretation, that should not be a cause of problem, because every person has been given this opportunity that if he sincerely or she sincerely discusses and understands a particular part of the Quran and acts according to it, then he or she has done his job. You are not going to be held accountable for someone other's understanding. So this is in a nutshell how I understand this verse.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saleem. Abdul Rahman, please unmute your mic and ask your question.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Saleem. Sir, this punishments for hypocrites, are these limited to prophetic era, or is this also applied to our times? And also please explain about this principle of itmam hujjat, because I'm quite new to it. I'm trying to understand it. Is this the same as itmam hujjat?
So the punishment of the hypocrites, so whether it's the punishment of the hypocrites or people who are not hypocrites and who are straight disbelievers or polytheists, all these punishments are confined to the prophetic era. None of these punishments can be extended in the post-prophetic era, because for the prophetic era you have to have a God's messenger. As far as this punishment of the hypocrites is concerned, it does not relate to itmamul hujjah. It relates to sedition, which the Quran is called fitna, and it means that a person is either rebelling against religion or he is siding with the enemies. So and they are at war, of course, with each other. So this is basically sedition, or this is basically rebellion and high treason that is being discussed here. And these hypocrites are being told that if they don't migrate to the land where Muslims are living, then they will be virtually considered amongst the disbelievers, and if there is a war, then they will be treated the way the other disbelievers are, and does not relate to itmamul hujjah. Itmamul hujjah is a separate context. That is that you just cannot punish any person other than the punishment that you just discussed, like for example killing someone or maybe high treason. So that's a separate category of punishments. But there is another form of punishment in which the messenger of God, they are authorized to punish people for deliberately denying the truth. So itmamul hujjah actually relates to a deliberate denial of the truth, and that is the whole concept which is behind the messengerhood of all the messengers of God. And the Quran has actually pointed this out by saying لِأَلَّا يَكُونَ لِلنَّاسِ عَلَى اللَّهِ حُجَّةٌ بَعْدَ الرُّسُلِ, that these messengers have been sent so that once they go away, a person does not have any pretext or an excuse to deny their message. So a messenger has to be present for itmamul hujjah to take place, and if that itmamul hujjah takes place, it means that now the truth has become so evident to people that except for stubbornness they have no reason to deny it. They are convinced in their heart, but outwardly, because of jealousy, because of malice, because of arrogance, because of their love for the faith of their forefathers, or because of the fact that if they accept the messenger of Muhammad, then the Israelites would be, totally, they would finish, because now the messenger or the line of the messenger has been transferred from the Israelites to the Ishmaelites, whatever the reason be. So if they are convinced of some truth and they still opt not to accept it, in spite of the truth becoming evident to them, then they are punished in this world. So that is the concept of Itmamul Hujjah that has to be explained separately.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem.
Thank you, sir.
Salman Aziz, please unmute your mic and ask your question.
Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Could you please guide, sir, that does the concept of ijma holds any value against the universal truth that one truth will be always superior to a million lies?
As I said, there is no concept of ijma at all. This is something that has been interpreted or wrongly interpreted by some of our jurists. As far as we understand, there is no such thing as ijma in religion. The only ijma which is acceptable in religion is on the text of the Quran and on the Sunnah, the way it has been given to us. The ijma, which people normally understand to mean the interpretation of the text, that all the scholars agree to a particular interpretation of the text, that is what ijma is normally regarded to be. So that is an ijma that is absolutely alien to the Quran. The Quran does not recognize that every person is unanimously there for a particular or one interpretation of religion. This never happened, and the Quran never vouches for it. I just gave you this example that the Sahaba used to differ with each other, and today the schools of thought that still exist, and they are there because of a difference of opinion, are virtually there because their difference can be traced back up to the Prophet's students, who are the companions. So therefore, any ijma that relates to the understanding of religion has no basis in religion. The only ijma that is acceptable or acknowledged in religion is that we are united on the text of the Quran. We are not united on the interpretation of the text. So there is an interpretation of the text and there is the text itself. The ijma is only found on the text itself, not on the interpretation of the text. These are two separate things. But our scholars, this is what our approach is, the Fara'i approach, what we call the Fara'i approach. But our traditional scholars say that not only there is ijma on the text of the Quran, but also on the understanding of the text. So the second ijma is something that we have tried to negate in this discussion, and also try to surmise that the very verse from which it has been derived does not accept it. Okay, literal and idiomatic translation starting from verse 104. So the words are wala tahinu fi ibtigha'il qawm, wa and, la not. Tahinu, you show weakness, fi in, ibtigha to follow or to pursue, al-qawm the enemy nation. So do not show slackness in following the enemy nation or in pursuing the enemy nation. In, if, takunu you, ta'lamuna are suffering, fa therefore, innahum they, ya'lamuna also suffering. So if you are suffering, they are also suffering. Kama ta'lamuna, the way you are suffering. So in yakunu ta'lamuna fa innahum ya'lamuna kama ta'lamun. If you are suffering, then they are also suffering like you are suffering. That is what literally it means. Ya'lamuna kama ta'lamun, suffering the way you are suffering. Wa and tarjuna, you expect. Min, from Allah, God, and you expect from God. Ma la yarjun, ma that, la not, yarjun they expect. You expect from God what they do not expect. Wa and kana is Allah, God, aliman, knowledgeable, hakiman, wise, and God is knowledgeable and wise. Inna anzalna ilayka al-kitaba بالحق لتحكم بين الناس بما أراك الله. Inna, indeed we, anzalna, have revealed, ilayka, towards you, al-kitab, the book, bilhaq, with the truth, le, so that, tahkuma, you can decide, bain nas, between people, bima, with that, arak Allah, what God has shown you. Or idiomatically it would mean that we have revealed to you the book with the truth so that you can decide between the people what God has shown you. Bima arak Allah, wa and, la not. Takun, you, lil kha'inina, with those who are who are khain or who are insincere, khasima, their advocate. So do not become the advocate of the dishonest. So basically khain is a person who is dishonest. Do not become a khasim, do not become an advocate lil khainin, of the khain, of the dishonest. Wa and istighfirillah. So if you combine to read it, that would be wastaghfirillah. Otherwise it would be wa istighfirillah. Wastaghfirillah would mean and seek God's forgiveness. Istaghfara means to seek forgiveness. Allah, God. Seek God's forgiveness. Inna Allah kana ghafoora rahima. Inna, indeed, Allah, God, kana is ghafoor, forgiving, rahima, merciful. Indeed, God is forgiving and merciful. Wa and la, not. Tujadil, argue. Anil lazina, on behalf of those yakhtanuna anfusahum, who were dishonest to their own souls, who were dishonest to their own selves. So do not argue with those, or do not argue on behalf of those who were dishonest to themselves. Inna, indeed, Allah, God, la, not, yuhibbu, likes, man, he, kana, is, khavan, who goes back on his promises. Khavan means a person who breaks his promises, and asima is a person who is a sinner who usurps the rights of other people. So inna Allah la yuhibbu man kana khavan asima would mean that indeed God does not like a person who breaks his promises and who confiscates the rights of other people or usurps the rights of other people. Yastaghfuna, they hide. Yastaghfuna min is actually one word. Yastaghfuna min nas would mean that they hide from people. Yastaghfuna min nas, they can hide from people or they hide from people. Wala yastaghfuna min Allah, but they cannot hide from God. I mean, they may well hide from people, but they cannot hide. Wala and not yastaghfuna, hide min Allah, from God, but they cannot hide from God. Wa and huwa, he, marahum, with them, mara, with whom, them, and he is with them is when yubayyituna, you whisper, ma, that, la, not, yarda, like, min al qawl, the words. So he is with them when you whisper those things which he does not like or which are against his will. Ma la yarda min al qawl would be that, la, not, yarda, he is happy, min al qawl, about those words. You whisper those things about which he is not happy about or which are against his will. Wa and kana is Allah, God, bima, regarding, ya'maluna, what they know, muhita, comprehensive or totally aware. Muhit means something that can be totally encompassed. So wa kana Allahu bima ya'maluna muhita would mean that he encompasses everything that they do. So ya'maluna, what they do. Muhita is like surrounding something, encompassing something. So God surrounds their deeds, which in other words means that he knows what they do. Ha antum haulai, it is you who are, jadaltum, you argue, anhum, on their behalf. It is you who argue on their behalf, fi, in, al-hayatid dunya, in this world. So it is you who argue on their behalf in this world. Fa, therefore, man, who, yujadil, argue, Allah, before God, anhum, on their behalf, yawm al-qiyamah, day of judgment. So who will argue with God on behalf of them on the day of judgment? So in this world you argue on behalf of them, but who will argue on behalf of them before God on the day of judgment? Or man, who, yakunu, will be, alayhim, on them, wakila, advocate. So who will be arguing on their behalf before God on the day of judgment, and who will be their advocate on that day? Va, and man, he who, ya'mal, does, su, a bad deed, he who does a bad deed, aw, or, yazlim nafsahu, is unjust to his soul. Yazlim nafsahu is unjust to his soul. Summa, thereafter, or after that, yastaghfirillah, he seeks God's pardon, he seeks God's forgiveness. Yajid, he will find, Allah, God, he will find God, Ghafoor, merciful, Rahima, Ghafoor, forgiving, Rahima, merciful. So he who does an evil or is unjust to his own self, then he asks God's forgiveness. Summa yastaghfirillah yajidillah. He will find God to be Ghafoor and Rahim. He will find God to be forgiving and merciful. Wa and man, he yaksib earns isman, evil. A person who earns an evil, literally it would mean a person who earns an evil, and idiomatically it would mean a person who does evil. Fa, therefore, innama, indeed, yaksibuhu, he earns it, ala nafsihi, for his own self. So he who does an evil does so for his own self. That would be the idiomatic understanding. Otherwise, literally it would mean he who earns an evil, therefore he earns it for his own self. Wa kana Allahu aliman hakima. Wa, and kana is Allah, God, alima, knowledgeable, hakima, wise. And God is knowledgeable and wise. Wa, and man, he yaksib earns khatiyatan, a mistake. He who earns a mistake, of course, would mean who commits a mistake. Aw isman, aw isman would mean aw a sin. Thumma, then yarmi bihi, he actually blames it, bari'an, to an innocent person. He blames that thing to an innocent person. He does that wrong thing himself, but blames an innocent person for it. Faqad ihtamala, fa, therefore, qad, indeed, ihtamala, he bore buhtana, slander, wa, and ism, sin, mubina, clear. So he who actually does the sin himself, but then he blames some innocent person. Summa, then, yarmi bihi, he blames bariya, an innocent person. فَقَدْ احْتَمَلَ بُهْتَانًا عَظِيمًا فَقَدْ احْتَمَلَ بُهْتَانًا وَإِسْمًا مُبِينًا. So therefore, he bore a buhtan, he bore a slander and an isman mubina, and a clear sin. وَلَوْلَا فَضْلُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكَ. Wa, and lawla, law would mean if, la, not. Fadlullah, God's blessing, alayka, on you. So were not the blessing of God on you, wa, and rahmatuhu, and his mercy, lahammat, indeed very hard, or indeed tried very hard, taifatum minhum, a group from among them, an, that, yudilluka, they lead you astray. So had not God's blessing and his mercy been on you, there was a group that tried, there was a group among them, hammat taifatum minhum. Hammat means try hard, taifa, group, minhum, from among them. There was a group among them, and yudillu, who wanted to lead you astray. Wa, and ma, not. Yudilluna, lead astray, and they do not lead astray illa, except anfusahum, their own selves. So ma yudilluna illa anfusahum would mean, and they do not lead anyone astray except their own selves. Wa, and ma yadurrunaka. Yadurrunaka means they do not harm you, means shay'in, in any way. So, and they do not harm you in any way. Wa, and anzalallah, anzala, revealed, Allah, God, and God has revealed, alayka, upon you, al-kitab, the law, wa, and al-hikmah, the wisdom. And God has revealed to you the al-kitab and the al-hikmah, the sharia and the wisdom. Wa, and allamaka, and has taught you, ma, that, lam, not, takun, you, ta'lam, knew, and has taught you what you did not know, ma lam takun ta'lam, that which you did not know. Wa, and kana is fadlullah, God's grace, alayka, on you, azima, great, and great is God's grace on you. La khayra fi kathirin min najwahum. La, not, khayra, any good, fi, in, kathirin min najwahum, most of their whisperings. So there is no good in most of their whisperings. Illa, except, man, he, amara, advised, bisadaqatin, except a person who advised on charity. Aw, or, ma'rufin, aw, something good. Aw, or, islahim bainan nas, or reforming between people, or reformation between people. So there is no good in the whispering of there is no good in most of their whisperings, except the person who advises on charity and on ma'ruf, which is good, and on the reformation of people. Wa, and man, he, yaf'al, does, zalika, this, He who does this, ibtigha'a mardatillah. Ibtigha, to find. Mardatillah, mardat means God's will. Allah, God. So he who does this to find God's will, fa, and Saufa, in very soon, nu'tihi, we shall give him, ajran, reward, azima, great. So he who does this, ibtigha'a mardatillah, to find God's will, basically it means to please God. When you find God's will, it would mean that you are actually pleasing God, or who want to please God. Then fasawfa nu'tihi ajran azima, indeed we will give him a great reward. Wa, and man, he, yushaqiqi rasula. So yushaq means to leave, in fact it means to oppose. Shaqqa means to oppose. So he who opposes a rasul, the messenger. وَمَن يُشَاقِقِ rasula would mean, and he who opposes the messenger, min ba'd, after, ma tabayyana lahul huda, after the truth has become evident to him. Ma, that, tabayyana, becomes evident, lahu, to him, al huda, from guidance. After that, a person who actually opposes God, after al huda has become evident to them, after guidance has become evident to them, wa, and yattabe, follows ghayra sabil, the path, the other path, or in fact it would mean ghayra sabil mu'minin, the path which is not the path of the believers. Ghayra sabil would mean the path which is not the path of the believers. Nuwallihi, we shall leave him, ma tawalla, to turn away. So we will actually make him follow what he would like to follow. That is what the idiomatic translation would be. Nuwallihi ma tawalla would literally mean that we will turn him to what he has turned, which means that we will let him do what he wants. Wa, and nuslihi, we shall admit him, jahannama, into hell. We shall admit into hell. Wa, and sa'at, very grave, masira, resting place. And it is a very grave resting place. It is a very evil resting place, obviously referring to hell. So this brings us to an end to the literal and idiomatic translation. Now you can raise questions regarding what we have studied, or in the absence of any such questions, we can also take general questions.
Ammar, do you want to ask your question now?
Haji, I just.
Let me see. Yeah, go ahead.
Ji, Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
Ji, my follow-up thoughts or question about what Dr. Saab said was basically that, yes, I agree that the whole of Islamic mainstream clergy obviously cannot agree on all aspects, but during those very difficult times where Muslims and Muslim scholarship in the West were constantly on the defensive, and they had to defend this battle for the right representation of the spirit of Islam in the Western media, at least during that time, they could say that what Osama bin Laden is saying and what other terrorist groups are saying about Islam is not the truth and is not acceptable, because we just have to look at the whole of the mainstream clergy of Islam, and even if they do not agree on everything, at least they agree on this much, that the interpretation of these verses is incorrect, which is being done by these brigands, especially because there is no Pope in Islam, there is no one central figure. This is the best second option that we have. So these are my thoughts on it, that in this such a scenario, ijma on even one thing becomes necessary or powerful.
Well, it does become powerful, but it also becomes tyrannical, because you have no means to know whether that ijma is correct or not. So in the case of the Pope also, you know what they had to come up with? They had to say this, that whatever the Pope says is on the authority of God. Because if a human being or a group of people or a group of human beings is allowed to interpret something, I mean, there's no chance that it would also end up on the wrong side. There's still a chance that it would end up on the wrong side. So even if there is a consensus, let's say, for a large number of people, what is the guarantee that it is correct? The only guarantee could be if the arguments of whatever is interpreted are correct. Otherwise, we see in our history there are so many wrong interpretations on which so many I mean, a very large number of people have united themselves, and they still persist on them, and they have no basis. So you see, it becomes a number, and number itself is not something that should decide what right and wrong are. If, let's say, a whole number of people say something, and you feel that that particular argument does not hold water, it does not hold weight, and it becomes obvious at times, then what should a person do? So you see, even the Pope or even the Christendom had to come up with this answer, that they are depending on the Pope's intellect because he is divinely guided. It's not that he is a human, I mean, he is a human being, but everything which the Pope says, their own belief is that he says on behalf of God. Because unless you say something on behalf of God, if it will never have that divinity or that certitude which is needed in the case of ijma. As I said, ijma can be wrong as well. A number of people can end up interpreting a Quranic verse in the wrong way. And the example is something that you yourself have given. So a very large part of our ummah still thinks that, I mean, we can wage war against disbelievers, and we can kill the mushrikun, we can still make slave women or capture slave women and have intimate relations with them. So a very large part of the Muslims, they still believes in them. And what stops us from following them? Again, what stops us is the reasoning, that they are standing on wrong reasoning. So you see, there is no guarantee if that ijma takes place, if ever it can take place, because it's humanly impossible for all these scholars to be at one place. Let's say, just for the sake of argument, if it takes place, what is the guarantee that it is correct? So because of the fact that it can still be incorrect, and because of the fact there could still be people who disagree, and because it's virtually impossible to come to a single opinion, because as you can see that if the Sahaba could not agree with themselves, how can we do? So I think it's like a goal that we are pursuing which actually does not exist. The scheme of God is not to combine people or to unite people on a single understanding. The scheme is to let them be free to understand what they understand, and at the same time acknowledge the other person's understanding while differing with that person. You can differ with that person, but you should not force that person to accept your view. This is the beauty of religion. It does not force you to accept a view that you don't think is correct. It makes you answerable to what you understand. And that is the case. I mean, the only thing is that when you start opposing the other person, or you start calling the other person as a disbeliever, maybe, or a kafir, or a person who is a persona non grata, or etc., it is then that this whole trouble sets in. And that is what has happened in our ummah also, that people have started to accept their own understanding as the correct one, and they have made this virtually a slogan that all other people are incorrect. So this self-righteous approach is something that has taken its toll.
Thank you for that, Dr. Saleem. Abdul Rahman, please unmute your mic and ask your question.
Thank you. Sir, my follow-up to your previous answer is like, I just wanted to understand, like, why did Allah put the description of all punishments in Quran if they were limited to the prophetic era? I mean, what?
That is not true. Just 3 punishments have been confined to God, and that is clearly mentioned in the Quran, and that is of polytheism, disbelief, and apostasy. Just 3 punishments. Otherwise, the punishment of theft, the punishment of adultery, the punishment of murder, the punishment of spreading disorder on earth, these are all prescribed for every Muslim, regardless of the prophetic era or the post-prophetic era. There are just 3 punishments that are confined to the prophetic era. The punishment of polytheism, to stick to polytheism in spite of being convinced that it is not correct. The punishment of disbelief, and reverting back to disbelief, which is called apostasy. The rest has not been tempered by God in any way, and that has been left. In fact, tempering is not the right word. The rest has been left to both eras to be practiced.
Sir, what about the punishments for guidance and misguidance? Just like previously we were discussing about the path of mu'minin for hypocrites. I mean, they would not be able to go back on guidance.
So, I mean, that is something that was being discussed on regarding the Prophet's era, that hypocrites who would stick to their own disbelief, and it says, in spite of being convinced that they are wrong, they know that they are wrong. You see, the Quranic words are min ba'di ma tabayyana lahul huda. They know what huda is, they know what guidance is, but they still oppose it and go to the other way. So God says, in such a case, I leave them to wander about in their own deviance. And that is something that God has, continues to do so even today. That people who deliberately do something wrong, then God makes them wander and just He leaves them to themselves. And He says that I'm going to take them to account one day on the day of judgment. So this is a very common thing that goes on even today.
Okay, sir. So that's what I was trying to understand. Like the punishment for misguidance and guidance.
So that is what I'm saying, that there are just three punishments, just the three ones that God has said, I have taken upon myself: the punishment of polytheism, the punishment of disbelief, and the punishment of apostasy.
Okay. We have a few raised hands, so I'll have to see first. Okay, Shabnam, please ask your question. Is it related to the passage today?
Yes, जी बिस्मा.
Okay,
Yes.
then go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you. सर ये आयत 115 में जिस पे जिससे अजमा की सारी ये बहस अरेज कर रही है, सर ये क्या पार्शली वैसे मेरा ये आंसर हो गया है, आपने दे दिया ये प्रीवियस क्वेश्चन के आंसर में. सर ये हम कह सकते हैं कि ये आयत जो है प्रोफेटिक एरिया से ही रिलेटेड थी, और उस वक्त जो मोमिनीन का रास्ता था सबीलुल मोमिनीन, तो ये मतलब उसको फॉलो करना था, या फिर हम लेटर टाइम्स के लिए कह सकते हैं कि जो मारूफ में सबीलुल मोमिनीन होता है, मारूफ में जो मोमिनीन कर रहे हैं, तो लेटर टाइम्स के लिए ये एप्लीकेबल है ऐसे, या ये उसी वक्त के लिए?
No, actually this is referring to them, that they are being addressed and they are being told that if they intentionally oppose the Prophet and his messengers, he says that yattabi ghayra sabilil mu'minin, if they do that, then we will make them wander in that wrong direction. And so it's referring to a particular group of people. But if you can extend it to a general, in a general way, then yes, that is also a case which has been discussed in the Quran, that people who deliberately know what the truth is and then they do not actually value that truth, then God says that I actually seal their hearts. And ulaika taba Allahu alayha, their hearts get sealed. So this is a law that is still in practice, that if you don't value the guidance that is found in your own hearts, that is found in your own conscience, and you continue with the wrong ways, then what happens is that God makes a seal cover your heart. And that is what the Quran has said in the very beginning when it says that khatamallahu ala qulubihim wa ala sam'ihim, that on their hearts and on their ears, on their eyesight, there is a ghishawa, there is a parda, there is a covering, which means that because of not valuing the guidance of God, they are made to wonder like this, that now it becomes impossible for them to accept guidance because now their hearts are sealed. So this is like a law that is still going on.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Saleem. Bhatti Saab, is your question related to the passage today, or is it a general question?
No, this is regarding today's ayah that
Please. Okay, please go ahead, ask your question.
Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Bye.
Sir, it's regarding this ayah of Anzalallahu alayka al-kitab wa hikmah. Hikmah, jo hai, I have a question about hikmah. Is it Sharia? Is it hadith, or both? That's what I'm not clear.
No, al-hikmah refers to faith and morality. And this has been mentioned in the Quran elsewhere. The word hikmah has been used for faith and morality elsewhere. So that is what it tells. Sharia is basically al-kitab. So al-kitab is in the Arabic language, just as the word al-kitab is used for a book, it is also used for the law. And Sharia itself is law. It's just divine law. So Sharia means divine law. So whenever the Quran speaks of al-kitab and al-hikmah, it refers to the components of religion, the two main components. One is al-kitab and the other is al-hikmah. Al-hikmah comprises faith and morality, and al-kitab comprises divine law, which is the Sharia.
Not hadith, that I have read somewhere that hadith also.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. Salman, is your question related to the passage today?
Yes, please.
Oh yeah, go ahead, please.
Sir, could you please kindly elaborate on the evidence and the logic that why Farahi School has considered the ijma to be relevant in only two domains?
What are those domains?
You said that, sir, regarding the Quranic text and the Sunnah.
Because you see, they are the domains that give The logic is that it gives certitude to religion. The text of the religion becomes a certain text. I mean, I know what the Quran is. I am not in any way confused at, well, this is Quran and this is not Quran, because it's the source of knowledge. If there is any doubt about that, then everything stands to question. So the text, which is the source of your religion or guidance, has been preserved and has been given to you in the same form as it was given to Prophet Muhammad. So the nusus or the text are for you to understand. However, as far as the understanding of religion is concerned, if that was something of the nature of being bound to someone, then we should either have had a verse of the Quran which tells us, and also the logistics and the mechanics of this, the how could we actually have the same view on all the verses of the Quran, because not all scholars exist in the same period of time. They come in different periods of time. The only option left perhaps would have been to have given the authority to the ijma of the Sahaba, because they existed in the same period of time. So even that did not happen. The Quran did not make this happen. And we do have historical reports which are very clear that the Sahaba differed with each other regarding many matters. I mean, Aisha, Abdullah ibn Abbas, Abdullah ibn Masud, Ubay ibn Ka'b, and you can see a host of other Sahaba differing with one another in a very subtle way, and at times is insisting on their view. So the only difference for them was that at times they had access to the Prophet. If they differed with themselves, they could go to the Prophet and have the situation resolved. So those Sahaba who were there in the presence of the Prophet could have it resolved. But there were Sahaba who had traveled to other places in the time of the Prophet, and they never came back. And if they held on a different opinion, there was no means for them to have it resolved, because they did not come back to the presence of the Prophet. So you see, even in the times of the Sahaba, this was virtually a non-existent thing. So the only thing that existed was the consensus on the text, so that text should be freely available to all generations from Prophet Muhammad until the Day of Judgment. That is something that was necessary, because this would have given certitude to religion. In the absence of this, we would have had speculative religion. I would have thought this to be religion, I could have thought this to be religion. But now I know that this is the Quran that I have to believe in. And let me give you another example. So there are so many variant readings of the Quran which have been transmitted through ahadith, or the way ahadith have been transmitted. So we clearly say that they are not part of the Quran, because they have been transmitted in a way that just a few people might be knowing that, well, this is a verse of the Quran. The only text on which there is ijma or consensus is the one that is known to us. So in the absence of that, the text of the Quran would have become a disputed thing. Some person would have said that, well, this reading is also part of the Quran, and another one would have said, well, this is not, but this is. The only difference, or the only way to have resolved this, would be that if people would have said, well, we have received these verses from all the Sahaba in the same way, that would have been the only way out, and that is what was adopted. And also let me point this out. Let me also point this out that the Quran has said, Inna nahnu nazzalna zikra wa inna lahu lahafizun, which means that we have revealed this zikr, we have revealed this Quran, and we are going to guard it. We are going to protect it from any contamination or any adulteration. So God made this promise, and the way it was fulfilled was that the text of the Quran was transmitted through tawatur or through ijma, so that no one could have messed it up.
What about Sunnah, sir?
Sunnah is exactly, because Sunnah is part of religion. So just as Quran is giving you religion, the source of religion, so it's not just the Quran that's the source of religion. Equally, an equal source of religion is the Sunnah, or the practice of the Prophet. Though both stand at the same pedestal, both give certitude. So the only way that certitude could have been given to both these would have been that they are transmitted through tawatur, and that is what has happened.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saleem. Imran, is your question pertaining to the text today?
Yes, very much so. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Shehzad. So just a quick question on something you touched upon, which is وَمَنْ يُشَاقِقِ الرَّسُولَ مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا تَبَيَّنَ لَهُ الْهُدَى. So I was trying to just understand, after guidance has become clear to them. So Is it that clarification comes from the Muslims, or they themselves are interested? Because these days, as you know, not many people are interested in learning about Islam and stuff. And some people, of course, are giving street dawah, which I don't know if you agree with. But then there are young non-Muslims who, although support Muslims, but they're not guided. So my question is basically, what does it mean, and and if the responsibility lies on us, how do we, undertake that? Thank you.
Actually, I was explaining that this verse does not relate to the scenario of today. It relates to a particular scenario in which the hypocrites of the times of the prophets of God, or Prophet Muhammad's times, are told that you are convinced, that you are convinced what the truth is. But in spite of being convinced of the guidance and the truth, you choose to follow some other path. So it's like a warning to them that if you deliberately choose some other path, then, what else can you expect but to wander astray? And that is what's going to happen. And in the end, you will be consigned to hell. So this is a scenario that has been related regarding the prophetic period.